I'm your mother." Waitress confronts billionaire's son. His reaction will blow your mind. What if the person serving your coffee had been searching for you their entire life? Lily Patterson's hands shook as she poured steaming coffee into the fine china cup. Her eyes locked on the man sitting at table 12. 43 years old, she'd worked at countless diners and cafes, but nothing had prepared her for this moment. The expensive suit, the confident posture, the way he gestured while talking on his phone. Everything about him screamed wealth and success. But it was his eyes that stopped her cold. Those same green eyes she'd memorized during 3 precious days in a hospital room before signing papers that broke her heart into a million pieces. The birthmark on his left hand, shaped like a tiny crescent moon, sealed her certainty. After 26 years of wondering, praying, and searching, her son was sitting 15 feet away, completely unaware that his mother was about to serve him breakfast. "Where are you watching from tonight?" The Sterling Heights Country Club wasn't the kind of place Lily ever imagined working, but desperate times had called for desperate measures. After losing her job at the downtown diner when it closed, she'd swallowed her pride and applied for the waitressing position at this exclusive establishment where the cheapest meal cost more than she made in a day. The irony wasn't lost on her. She was now serving the wealthy elite she'd once resented, the kind of people who might have given her son the life she never could. Alexander Hartwell, she'd learned his name from overhearing conversations at neighboring tables, came in every Tuesday morning at exactly 9:15. He always ordered the same thing: black coffee, 2 sugars, and the house special omelet. He was polite but distant, the way wealthy people often were with service staff. They existed in the same space but different worlds. For 3 weeks, Lily had watched him from across the dining room, her heart pounding every time he walked through those heavy oak doors. She'd done her research, staying up late on her old laptop, piecing together fragments of his life from news articles and business magazines. Alexander Hartwell, CEO of Hartwell Industries, adopted as an infant, philanthropist, unmarried. The timeline matched perfectly down to the exact date she'd given birth at St. Mary's Hospital. But knowing and proving were 2 different things entirely. What if she was wrong? What if she approached him and made a fool of herself? What if he rejected her outright, or worse, had her fired and banned from the premises? The fear of losing this job, her only source of income, warred with the desperate need to know the truth. Today felt different, though. He'd been on his phone for 20 minutes, his voice carrying just enough for her to catch fragments about a board meeting and quarterly reports. But when he hung up, instead of immediately diving into his breakfast, he sat back and stared out the window with an expression she recognized all too well. It was the same look she saw in her own mirror every morning, the hollow ache of something missing, something that money and success couldn't fill. The moment had arrived, and her heart hammered against her ribs as she realized she couldn't walk away without knowing for certain. Lily's legs felt like jelly as she approached his table, the coffee pot trembling in her grip. She'd rehearsed this moment 1,000 times in her head, but now that it was happening, every carefully planned word evaporated. Alexander looked up from his phone with the practiced smile he probably gave to everyone in the service industry. Polite but detached. "More coffee, sir?" she managed, her voice barely steady. "Please," he said, not really looking at her as he scrolled through emails. But when she leaned forward to pour, her sleeve brushed against his hand, and something made him glance up. For just a second, their eyes met, and she saw a flicker of confusion cross his face. "Have we met before?" he asked, tilting his head slightly. "You seem familiar." The words hung between them like a bridge she was terrified to cross. This was her opening, her chance, but the magnitude of what she was about to do hit her like a physical blow. This man had built an empire, commanded boardrooms, and lived a life of privilege and power. What right did she have to shatter his world with the truth about his humble beginnings? She started, then stopped, her courage failing. "No, sir, I don't believe so." But he kept studying her face, and she could see the wheels turning in his mind. There was intelligence there, the same sharp perception she'd possessed as a young woman before life had worn her down. He'd built his success on reading people, on seeing patterns others missed. "The way you're looking at me," he said quietly, setting down his phone entirely now. "It's like you know something I don't." His voice was gentler than she'd heard it before, curious rather than dismissive. "What is it?" The coffee pot felt impossibly heavy in her hands. Other diners continued their conversations around them, oblivious to the earthquake about to split open right there at the table 12. She thought about the tiny room she rented above the bakery, about the photo she kept hidden in her jewelry box, the only picture she had of him as a newborn. She thought about all the birthdays she'd missed, all the scraped knees she hadn't kissed, all the bedtime stories she'd never read. The truth was right there, balanced on the edge of her tongue. One sentence would change everything for both of them. But once those words were spoken, there would be no taking them back, no returning to the safety of wondering from afar. If this moment touched your heart, please give the video a thumbs up. Alexander was still waiting for her answer, his green eyes searching her face with growing intensity, and Lily realized her silence was saying more than any words could. "Ma'am, are you all right?" Alexander's voice cut through her paralysis. He'd half risen from his chair, genuine concern replacing his earlier curiosity. "You look like you've seen a ghost." The kindness in his voice nearly broke her resolve entirely. Here was this successful, powerful man showing worry for a middle-aged waitress he'd never really noticed before. It reminded her of the compassionate little boy she'd imagined him becoming during all those sleepless nights. "I'm sorry," she whispered, stepping back from the table. "I should get back to work." But as she turned to leave, he gently caught her wrist. Not forcefully, just enough to stop her retreat. The touch sent electricity through her entire body. This was her child, her baby, the tiny life she'd carried and loved and sacrificed everything for. "Wait," he said, his voice dropping even lower. "Please, I know this sounds crazy, but I feel like—" He paused, struggling with words. "I've had this weird sense of déjà vu since you walked up. And the way you're looking at me, it's how my adoptive mother used to look when she was trying to tell me something important, but couldn't find the words." The mention of his adoption hit her like a physical blow. Of course he knew. Of course the Hartwells had been honest with him. She'd hoped for that. Prayed for parents who would love him enough to tell him the truth about where he came from. "You're adopted," she said. Not a question, but a statement that seemed to surprise them both. He nodded slowly. "Since I was 3 days old, my parents were wonderful people. They gave me everything I could have ever wanted. But there's always been this—" He gestured vaguely at his chest. "This empty space, you know? Like part of my story was missing." Tears she'd held back for 26 years finally spilled over. She tried to wipe them away quickly, but Alexander had already seen them. His expression shifted from confusion to something deeper. Recognition, perhaps, or maybe just the human instinct to comfort someone in pain. "What aren't you telling me?" he asked gently. "Whatever it is, I can handle it. I've been wondering about my birth parents my entire life." The dining room seemed to fade away around them. This was the moment she'd dreamed of and dreaded in equal measure. Her son, this incredible man who'd grown up to be everything she'd hoped, was asking her to fill in the missing pieces of his life. Have you ever faced something like this? Let us know in the comments. The weight of 26 years of love and longing pressed down on her shoulders as she realized there was no turning back now. "My name is Lily Patterson," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "And 26 years ago, I was 17 years old when I gave birth to a baby boy at St. Mary's Hospital." She watched his face change as the words sank in, watched the exact moment when understanding dawned in those familiar green eyes. Alexander went completely still. The busy sounds of the dining room, clinking silverware, muted conversations, the hiss of the espresso machine, all seemed to disappear into white noise. He stared at her for what felt like an eternity, his successful businessman's composure cracking like ice under pressure. "You're saying," he started, then stopped, his voice hoarse. "I'm your mother," Lily finished, the words she'd carried in her heart for over 2 decades finally finding their voice. "I'm so sorry to tell you this way, but when I saw you, I knew. The birthmark on your left hand, your eyes, you look exactly like my father did when he was your age." Alexander's hand automatically went to the crescent-shaped mark he'd carried his entire life, the one detail about himself that had never made sense to the Hartwells' family genetics. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. The transformation happening across his features was heartbreaking and beautiful at the same time, shock giving way to wonder, confusion melting into something that looked almost like relief. "I need to sit down," he said shakily, even though he was already seated. Lily quickly moved to the chair across from him, her professional duties forgotten as she focused entirely on her son's face. "I was just a kid," she continued, her voice growing stronger now that the secret was finally out. "Single mother, no family support, working 2 jobs just to afford prenatal care. I knew I couldn't give you the life you deserved. The Hartwells, they were everything I wasn't. Stable, educated, financially secure. I thought I was doing the right thing." "You were," Alexander said suddenly, his voice thick with emotion. "God, you were. They loved me completely and gave me every opportunity. I had the most incredible childhood." He leaned forward, reaching across the table to cover her work-worn hands with his own. "But I always wondered about you. Always hoped you were okay, that you didn't regret—" "Never," Lily said fiercely. "Not for 1 second did I regret having you. I just regretted that I couldn't be what you needed." If you've been enjoying this story, subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming tales. Alexander squeezed her hands gently, and for the first time in 26 years, the missing piece of both their hearts began to heal. What happened next would stay with both of them forever. Alexander stood up slowly, his tall frame towering over the small dining room table, and without a word, he opened his arms. Lily didn't hesitate. She stepped into her son's embrace like she'd been waiting 26 years for this exact moment. And maybe she had been. They held each other while other patrons politely looked away, giving them privacy for their reunion. Lily felt like she was drowning in the best possible way, overwhelmed by the solid reality of the man her baby had become. He smelled like expensive cologne and success, but underneath it all, she could swear she caught a hint of the sweet baby scent she remembered from those 3 precious days. "I can't believe it's really you," Alexander whispered into her hair. "I used to make up stories about what you might be like, where you might be living. I never imagined I'd find you serving coffee 15 minutes from my office." When they finally pulled apart, both had tears in their eyes, but they were smiling through them. Alexander sat back down and gestured for her to stay seated across from him, as if he couldn't bear to let her get too far away now that he'd found her. "Tell me everything," he said. "I want to know about your life, about what happened after you made the hardest decision any parent ever has to make." So she did. She told him about finishing high school, about working her way through community college 1 class at a time. She told him about the small apartment she'd shared with 3 roommates, about the nights she'd cried herself to sleep wondering if he was happy and healthy and loved. She told him about keeping track of his achievements from afar, his high school graduation announcement in the newspaper, his college scholarship, his first business success. "You've been watching over me this whole time," he said with wonder. "From a distance," she admitted. "I never wanted to interfere with the life your parents gave you, but I needed to know you were okay." Alexander pulled out his phone and showed her pictures. His adoptive parents, who'd passed away within a year of each other just 5 years ago, his childhood home, his charity work with local foster care organizations. "I think they would have loved to meet you," he said softly. "They always told me that whoever my birth mother was, she must have loved me very much to make the sacrifice she did." "They were right," Lily said simply. "Every day of my life." The morning stretched into the afternoon as they talked, sharing stories and filling in the gaps that had existed for so long. When Alexander finally had to leave for his meetings, he took out a business card and wrote his personal number on the back. "Dinner tomorrow?" he asked. "I'd like to introduce you to my life properly." "I'd love that," Lily said, tucking the card into her apron pocket like the treasure it was. If you enjoyed this story, please remember to like, leave a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe for more heartwarming tales. Sometimes the family we've lost finds its way back to us when we least expect it, proving that love really can conquer time and distance.